My dad always said I'd amount to nothing. Growing up, every report card, every achievement, every small victory was met with the same cold dismissal. Don't get too comfortable, he'd say. Real life doesn't care about your little trophies. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, he shrugged and said smart kids often peak early. When I got into MIT on a partial scholarship, he reminded me that partial meant I wasn't good enough for a full ride. When I landed my first job as a software engineer, he asked when I was going to get a real career that mattered. 28 years of this. 28 years of feeling like I was disappointing him just by existing. So when he was dying in the hospital, those were still the only words he had for me. The cancer had spread everywhere, but his ability to cut me down remained razor sharp. 3 days before he passed, I sat by his bed trying one last time to connect. I'd just gotten promoted to senior engineer at a promising tech startup, something I thought might finally break through his wall of criticism. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye with those familiar, cold blue eyes and said I was still the same failure I'd always been, that I'd never accomplished anything real, that he'd wasted his time hoping I'd turn into something worthwhile. The nurses kept apologizing for his medication-induced confusion, but his eyes were crystal clear. His voice was steady. He meant every word. I left that hospital room knowing it was probably our last conversation. Part of me wanted to storm out and never come back, but I couldn't do that to my mom. She'd been holding on to hope that we'd reconcile before the end, that he'd have some deathbed revelation about loving his son. He died on a Tuesday morning while I was in a meeting. Mom called crying, saying she was sorry I didn't get to say goodbye. I told her I already had. The funeral was small. Family, a few neighbors, his old work buddies from the plant where he'd worked for 35 years. During the service, people shared memories about what a dedicated father and provider he was, how he worked double shifts to keep food on the table, how he never missed a baseball game or school play. I sat in the front row listening to stories about a man I'd never met, wondering if we'd lived in the same house. My uncle talked about how proud Dad was of his family. My mom's sister mentioned how he'd light up talking about his son's accomplishments. I almost laughed out loud. Were they thinking of someone else's father? After everyone left and the casseroles were put away, Mom asked me to help clean out his study. She couldn't bear to do it alone, and my sister lived 3 states away. I agreed, though the thought of going through his things felt like volunteering for one final round of judgment. His desk was exactly as he'd left it. Bills organized in neat stacks, his reading glasses folded on top of yesterday's newspaper, coffee mug still sitting there with a ring of dried residue at the bottom. Everything methodical and controlled, just like him. I started with the drawers, sorting through old warranties and bank statements. Mom was in the bedroom packing his clothes, and I could hear her crying softly every few minutes. The top drawer was full of the usual junk. Rubber bands, paper clips, expired coupons he'd never used. But the bottom drawer stuck when I tried to pull it open. I had to work at it, pulling harder until it finally gave way with a sharp jerk that nearly sent me backward. Inside was a folder marked David's stuff in his careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings from my high school science fair win, yellowed with age and carefully trimmed. A printout of my college graduation announcement that he must have gotten from the alumni magazine. A screenshot of the company press release about my recent promotion printed just last week. Every achievement he'd dismissed to my face, he'd quietly saved. Every accomplishment he'd told me didn't matter was preserved like a precious document. At the very bottom was a handwritten note on his company letterhead. So proud of my son. Don't know how to tell him. I finally understood why he never said goodbye.